Hello and welcome to Gut Shot, home of the hottest takes for Magic the Gathering. I'm Will, and joining me as always is my boy Frederick.
What's up? I'm Fred on Twitch at WarCrimesUwu, and welcome to Gut Shot, the MTG podcast that only made the cut into your draft deck because it cycles.
Man, that's not good praise for us, is it? Is that good? Do we want to be that?
I don't know. There have been some really good uncommons of cycling and limited before.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'll take it. I think that's a good praise. We got to take all the good praise we can get, especially at this point in our podcasting careers. Hey, Fred, how's it going? How you doing today?
Pretty all right. Had some ups and downs, but I'm excited to record today.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it'll be a good one.
Yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, but I got my flu shot this morning, very late in the season. I don't think it's advisable to wait this long, but I had school starting up, spring semester, so I wanted to go ahead and make sure I was safe and not doing anything crazy. Get your flu shot. So my right arm is feeling a little sore, so if you hear me like over here making like some sort of god awful noise during our very important audio podcast, it's me flailing my right arm to make sure it's not bothering me as we talk about this very important Magic topic.
Indeed. Good. Thanks for the heads up. I have not gotten my flu shot, I guess just because if the flu shots are being given out at the same place as COVID is being tested, probably a lot of people with COVID are going into those areas, so it just kind of skeeves me out. I've been thinking mostly that I this might be flawed logic, but if I'm wearing a mask everywhere anyway and I'm staying home all the time anyway, then I'm probably not going to get the flu. But I'm just kind of, I don't know, I'm skeeved out of going anywhere where COVID testing is happening.
Sure, I think that's defensible. Would you be offended if I called you a NEET?
Not at all.
Well, you're a NEET and you're being incredibly safe, on the average anyway. So I think you're fine.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, I get it in a normal year. I'm not an anti-vaxxer or anything, and I'm excited to get the COVID vaccine as soon as I can. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
luckily, thank God Prince Philip and the Queen were able to get their COVID vaccine. We stand.
Yeah, and all of those hospital administrators as well, right? The people who just work in their office 9 to 5 Monday through Friday out of hospital.
Yep. Thank God. They're real heroes.
You want to talk about Magic?
Let's talk about Magic.
Okay. So this topic, I brought up this topic because I want to talk about a series of deck lists, an archetype that's near and dear to my heart. This is something I've been playing pretty much since the archetype was born, and that's treasure hunt decks. These decks are kind of considered to be a bit gimmicky, a bit memey, but they are a lot of fun, and there's a lot of different ways you could go about it. Have you ever played a deck like this, Fred?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when I was getting into Paper Modern, while I was saving up the store credit from tournaments to build my actual Modern deck I wanted to play, the first thing that I played was Seismic Swans, which is a treasure hunt deck. And this was in Modern back, I think pre-Eldrazi Winter. Twin was really good. Twin was a dominant deck. Jund, Grixis Control, Tron, the classic Modern. Yeah. And I was here with my my 48 land Seismic Swans list. So I too have a pretty rich history with treasure hunt.
Yeah. A classic Modern, not the Euro piles that we see this. The real Magic. 2015, 16 Modern. I'm right there with you. But okay, so as a little background, what are we talking about when we talk about treasure hunt decks? So this is a type of deck that revolves around the sorcery spell Treasure Hunt. 2 mana, 1 generic, and a blue sorcery. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-lane card, then put all cards revealed this way into your hand. This is a common from Worldwake, and the idea is that in a normal deck you would play this, and you would draw, anywhere between 1 to 3 cards, something like that, if you're playing a normal mix of spells and lands. The decks that we're talking about today do not do that. They play 4 treasure hunt, 1 or a smattering of other cards, and then somewhere between somewhere between 50 and 60 lands. So whenever you play treasure hunt, the what's the word I'm looking for?
You draw your whole deck.
Probability. The probability of you drawing like 30, anywhere between 15 and 30 cards is very high. And there are a number of cards you can use to break this. And we're going to go through all of these different types of decks and show you how many ways you can break this card.
Yes, I'm very excited. I only knew of one of these, or two of these really, before you, or I guess three. I only knew of some of these before you showed me the lists that you brought to the table this week. So, we are going to get into some treasure hunt decks. Do you want to talk about the classics first?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to just make a bit of a caveat here. There are some like land-focused decks that are normal decks and use treasure hunt as just a normal draw spell. We're not talking about those decks. We're talking about specifically playing like an absurd amount of lands and then one or two copies of the card that breaks, being able to draw so many lands.
Yeah,
and as we mentioned before, there are a lot of different cards that you can use to break treasure hunt. So this is this type of deck is something that you can play both in paper, which I believe it's modern back. So you're not. I don't think you can play anything in Pioneer. I tried to see if there was a pauper deck that was of this line. I wasn't really able to find anything, but it would be pretty easy for something to be printed that would break treasure hunt in that format. So keep your eyes peeled for something that might make this a pauper deck. But you'll be playing this in modern or just kitchen table. And then there's a number of arena decks that you can also use this combo in. We'll talk about decks for all of these formats.
Absolutely, I'm very excited. Sorry.
So I believe that there are three categories of treasure hunt decks. And this is completely arbitrary on my part, but this is how I'm classifying this. I would say that's classic, new, and then real. And we're going to start with the classic. This is the very first treasure hunt deck that was playable in the first card that was able to break this card, and that's Zombie Infestation. With all of these classic decks, you'll see that the point is to play a card that's going to let you turn the lands that you're drawing into creatures for you to attack with. And Zombie Infestation is the OG. This is the real one. Yes,
this is the Coca-Cola back when they still put cocaine in
it. Yeah, for sure. Zombie Infestation's kind of an old card. It was originally from Odyssey. It's a black enchantment, one generic and one black, so it's 2 mana. Actually, one of the cheaper cards on this list. Discard 2 cards from it's an enchantment, and then has the ability discard 2 cards from your hand, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token into play. So what this deck wants to do is use a colorless spell, colorless land that a lot of people are probably familiar with, Reliquary Tower, which taps for colorless, but it makes it to where you don't have a hand size. So while you're playing Treasure Hunt, you're able to draw tons of cards and then play a Reliquary Tower and then not have to discard those cards. And then you amass a hand of like 30 to 40 cards. It's a little ridiculous, and I think one of the real joys of playing this type of deck in paper is just the ridiculousness of just flipping over your deck card after card after card, and then after you hit another Treasure Hunt or a Zombie Infestation, you just get to hold 30 cards in your hand. Have you ever had a game like that, Fred?
I've played against players like that, where they just kind of flip over the giant stack of tokens. There was a dude who came to my LGS once. I don't remember if it was a PPTQ or if he just like felt like playing Modern that weekend. But he smelled like cigarettes. He got really, really pissed when his Zombie Infestation deck didn't work. It's basically the same list in Modern as it is in Historic. There's not much else you can do. You're not really allowed to include other spells. And his tokens were all these really obnoxious anime Rule 34 drawings on little magic-sized cards. Not that he did, like he commissioned them or bought them or something. But he just flipped over this, the one game that he did get the Infestation out, he just flipped over this stack of what looked like Naruto Rule 34. So I have not a great frame of reference for the Zombie Infestation deck. I think it's pretty sweet. But that was the one time that I actually played against it, and it was uncomfortable.
Well, I tell you what, next time, once the pandemic is over and we can all play Magic in person, you and I will have to get together, and I can break out some of my paper treasure hunt decks, so I can overwrite that memory with a fun one with a friend and normal people who don't act like that in public.
That would be awesome. I would really love that. In 2023 when COVID is over.
Right, right. I meant to do this earlier, but I want to go ahead, and you can see on the screen right now for the deck list for Zombie Infestation, there's a little land called Mystic Sanctuary. And this is a common from Throne of Eldraine. And this is a really special card, and I think is probably one of the most like powerful things that have been printed for all sorts of treasure hunt decks. And this card really elevates the playability of all of these treasure hunt decks. Mystic Sanctuary actually sees play in some older formats, doesn't it? Like Legacy. Is it seen Legacy play?
It's seen play in modern Uro piles for sure. I'm not sure about Legacy, but he's playing Miracles.
Yeah, it's definitely a good card, and I believe a great example of how powerful Throne of Eldraine was. But to say what the card does, it's a non-basic land, but it has the island subtype, and it says whenever Mystic Sanctuary enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more other islands. And all of these decks will have some sort of blue in them, of course, to cast Treasure Hunt. When it enters the battlefield untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library, and then it taps for blue. These decks have a really hard time if you have one treasure hunt in hand and then it gets countered or something happens, like you draw your win condition way too early, you kind of just die. Mystic Sanctuary actually really increases the percentage of the time that these decks will be able to still play after something happens to one of your treasure hunts, or for some of the other decks we're going to talk about, your Wincon, which happens to be an instant or sorcery. So Mystic Sanctuary is pretty much going to be in all of these decks, and really is not a deck you can, or not a card you can leave out of your decks in this day and age. You just have to be playing Mystic Sanctuary. It's just so good.
Do you think Mystic Sanctuary was a mistake?
I think so. I've heard a little bit about the havoc it's causing in other formats. It's a common, so I know that this is like something that Pauper is seeing. Like I like it for these kinds of decks, but for like real decks where it's like you just get your best spell back, immediately as your next draw for the low price of playing an untapped island, I do think its power level is a little above where it ought to be.
Yeah, you can also bounce it with Cryptic Command and then put Cryptic Command on top of your deck.
Yeah, that's that's not good. I just wanted to take a few moments to highlight Mystic Sanctuary as a card you're going to be seeing over and over in these lists. But I have the list up here, and you can see that Reliquary Tower is in there. For each of these decks, I want to go through just a real quick pros and cons list of why you would want to choose this version of the Treasure Hunt deck over the others. And for this deck, I think there are two pretty good pros for it. One, it has one of the faster average clocks out of all of these. You'll see a theme around these that like turn 5 is usually the turn where these decks are really going to pop off, as they say, and win the game. With Zombie Infestation being one of the cheaper win conditions out of all these decks, it's totally possible to have a turn 4 where you play a treasure hunt, fill up your hand, play the Zombie Infestation that you drew, and then at the end of that round of turns, discard your hand, make enough tokens to win, and you're swinging to win on turn 5, where a lot of the other decks are actually only creating the tokens on their turn 5, or finally emptying their deck for that particular win con. So this is definitely one of the faster clocks, out of all these decks.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. You also have the option to sort of like spread out your win condition. Like you dump the zombies on their end step, and then let's say they have some instant speed variant of Pyroclasm. Cool. Dump some more zombies down. You don't have to like drop them all at once.
Yeah, that it gives you a little bit more play there. It's not it's still kind of on rails, but it's not as on rails. You kind of have some actual decisions to make. That's a really good point, Frederick. And then the other pro that I put down here, it has possible game if you draw Zombie Infestation early. Some of these decks, they just die if you don't do if you don't go off, so to speak. If you draw a Zombie Infestation early and it's not like an auto win swinging with all your tokens, you could still play the game. You play your Zombie Infestation, you make your tokens you can, and then every 2 turns you're going to make a token, while you're trying to maybe draw another treasure hunt or draw a Mystic Sanctuary. The game isn't necessarily over once you kind of whiff a little bit with your Infestation combo. So that is a consideration. Those games you're probably still not going to win, but the percentage is not 0.
Right. It gives you enough time to get to your treasure hunt, so you can go off.
Yeah, for sure. I do think that there are definitely some cons with this particular version. And for me, the big one is basically more failure points. A lot has to kind of happen for this to, go off. You can draw Zombie Infestation and not have enough cards for it to be lethal, like we just talked about. You have to be able to stock your hand with a Reliquary Tower. Sometimes you're just not going to get there. I've definitely had games where you draw a ton of cards off a treasure hunt and not a single one of them are Reliquary Tower. That's super awkward. Then you have to discard all those cards, and it's almost like you never really drew those cards at all because you can't do anything with your graveyard. Mystic Sanctuary sometimes will have to come into play tapped because it's the land you have, and you had to play some of your swamps. This requiring blue and black mana also makes it a little awkward because you have to play some swamps. So that plus the fact that one of your main cards only produces colorless creates more situations where you could be in a tight bind color mana available wise.
Okay, yeah, I think that's definitely true here, and that's definitely true of some decks that we'll see later on. Triple red and then double blue. I think that's a fair thing to lob at this deck. This is also the easiest one to build without like a shitload of wild cards or a shitload of paper money. You can go without the watery graves.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you could get away. You have to have the Mystic Sanctuaries, you have to have the towers, but other than that, you only need basics. And every time I've played this deck, it's always just been all islands and all swamps. So yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, there's that too. And the last con that I'll say for this deck is it's one of the decks that takes a lot of clicking. Some of these will just work immediately after you play the Wincon. This, you play Zombie Infestation, you have a hand of like 30 cards, but then you actually have to do the clicking in Arena to make the token. So that's a consideration. And when I've played these decks on Arena, in the last couple of days, I've really been going hard on all of these treasure hunt decks in Arena. The clicking does kind of get annoying after a while, so just be prepared for that.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our second one, and this is also a deck that's available in Arena, and I think that this was the first one available in Arena. This card, because this card came out when we got Treasure Hunt, but before Zombie Infestation was added to Arena. I remember when I very first got Treasure Hunt on Arena, this was the deck that I built because it was the Wincon that we had, and this is Awaken the Erstwhile. This is a 5 mana sorcery, black, from Ravnica Allegiance, I believe. 3 generic and 2 black. Each player discards all the cards in their hand, then creates that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Did you play this card at all when it was just like a normal standard card during its standard environment?
Actually, this card was incredibly hard to evaluate. I played this in my mono black mid-range deck that played, back when it was Dominaria and Ravnica legal at the same time. And you had the Eldest Reborn, and the top end was the Flample Demon that could pay 2 life to Surveil 2. And the purpose of the card was, the deck played 4 Gutter Bones, so if you discarded some Gutter Bones early and your opponent also discarded their hand, you'd have the same amount of zombies, but you would also have Gutter Bones that can keep coming back.
That's pretty good.
And then you start winning from there. Yeah. And then the other purpose was when I had the Flample Demon out, but my opponent could have like Settle the Wreckage. I would Awaken the Erstwhile, and then either they'd have to spend their Settle the Wreckage mana to counter it, and then I could safely swing and win with the Flample Demon, or they wouldn't counter it, and then they wouldn't have Settle the Wreckage anymore, and I could swing over it with my Flample Demon. And that happened more often than you would think. So the card was actually really useful in that format.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good, the way that you were using it. I have never played this card outside of a treasure hunt deck, but this actually works pretty well with the treasure hunt deck. And we're going to kind of keep going through these a little faster now that we've kind of done all the beginning work to explain what these decks are and why they include the lands that they do. This works a lot like the Zombie Infestation. It is a bit slower because it's a 5-mana spell, but as you can see, you still need the Reliquary Towers. You still have the Mystic Sanctuary, and Mystic Sanctuary does double duty here because you can rebuy and Awaken the Erstwhile if you need to, if it gets milled or something like that. So you get that little bit there. The pros for this deck, I would say, the ability to discard your opponent's hand while you're making the tokens is really good, and it's very unlikely that they're going to draw anything that's going to get them out of being overwhelmed by your zombie tokens. Like, yeah, they might like top deck a sweeper, but most of the time what they top deck is not actually going to matter all that much. Once this resolves, the math usually works out in your favor, because you'll be making a ton of zombies. They'll most likely have to block as many zombies as they can with their zombies. So it's almost like they never got any zombies to begin with, and then they're in top deck mode. So that's definitely a pro.
Yeah, the only consideration I would make is a lot of times, planeswalkers are pretty popular in standard right now. And a lot of times, like, you don't have any way to deal with a planeswalker before you Awaken the Erstwhile. So if that planeswalker has anything that lets them draw or search to try to find a board wipe, or if that planeswalker has a board wipe on it itself, then you basically just lose.
Yeah, that's true. You have to be careful about that. And sometimes your opponent's and that's the thing with these decks, sometimes you're just not going to get there. Like, your opponent just has the answer, or you just don't go off. So yeah, you'll definitely have to pay more attention to what's on your opponent's board when you play this. As for cons for this deck, it's really a lot of the same things as Zombie Infestation. Your failure points because you're trying to play Reliquary Tower, Mystic Sanctuary, and black mana at the same time. This has a really slow clock. You have to create the tokens on turn 5 and then attack on turn 6. And that's even if you get Awaken the Erstwhile to be able to play on turn 5, and you don't have to wait a turn because your treasure hunts didn't work out the way you want to. So this is one of the slower clocks, which is the price you pay for being able to discard your opponent's hand when you cast it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think this is one of my favorites just because I like the Awaken the Erstwhile card, but it is a lot like you do it once and then you're just out of gas unless you've got like the Mystic Sanctuary next turn. So it's not resilient in the way that the straight up Zombie Infestation variant is. I would say this is definitely worse than the Zombie Infestation variant.
Yeah. I would say I won't make a value judgment between those two because I feel they're super, similar. I will say I will choose Awaken if I have to play one, solely because you do not have to do all the clicking. You cast Awaken and it discards all your cards for you and makes the tokens. It saves time. It's not a headache. I love the fact that you don't have to do all that clicking.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to our next deck here. This one is super. Yeah. This one is super like near and dear to my heart because this is my preferred way to win via tokens, and that's Worm Harvest. Do you have any experience with this card?
Yeah, it came in a Commander Precon, and I stuck it in a Commander Precon deck. I also this was part of my cube for a while. It was one of the black green cards you could draft, and it was probably on the lower end of playability in the cube, but. I do enjoy that. I love Retrace. I think it's a really neat mechanic and it's implemented really well. I wish they would bring it back. It seems like they're trying to recapture that without just reusing the mechanic, like how they did in Guilds of Ravnica with Jumpstart. I wish they'd just go back to Retrace because I feel like they did it perfectly with that mechanic. But I digress. I do like the card Worm Harvest a great deal. I'm excited to hear how it works with Treasure Hunt.
Yeah. I love this card. So it's a bit of an older card. I think it originally came out in Morning Tide or Eventide, one of those sets. And it is a 5 mana spell, 2 generic, and then 3 hybrid, green and black. It's a sorcery. Create a 1/1 black and green worm creature token for each land in your graveyard. And then
I think Atticus likes this card too.
yeah, for sure, something like that. But it also has Retrace, as Frederick just said. You may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other cost. So one great thing about this is it has a lot of resilience. Sometimes casting it won't get you there the first time, or it gets countered, or you have to like block with the tokens to make sure you don't die. But as long as you keep drawing lands, as you usually will, you can you can keep casting this from the graveyard as many times as you need, as long as your opponent doesn't do something with your graveyard. I love this, and I think that being able to recast it from your graveyard is so powerful.
I think that's true, but I think the deck hinging on that makes this probably one of the weakest variants of the deck, especially given the prevalence of things like Scavenging Ooze. Like if we're talking standard, you got Scavenging Ooze, or historic, you've got Scavenging Ooze, you've got Daxos, or not Daxos, the black one, Timareth. And if we're talking modern, I mean, you've got Rest in Peace. This dies to things in the main board in a way that the other decks don't, because a lot of main boards will play things like Skoos.
That's absolutely right, and I would say that that's the biggest con for this deck, is that it is weak to graveyard hate, and there's a lot of incidental graveyard hate out there, especially if you're playing any sort of like real or high-powered formats. If you're going anywhere above like kitchen table or like historic ranked ladder, you're going to see a lot of graveyard hate. So you can't really, not that this is a deck that you cannot play in arena. This is a paper only for the time being. I don't think this card's going to be coming to arena anytime soon. But yeah, this is really weak to graveyard hate. It's also slow, so it has the same problem of Awaken the Erstwhile, where you make the tokens on 5 if you're lucky, and then you have to swing on 6 or even later, because these tokens are weaker than the 2/2 zombie tokens that we've seen before. And then you also have to think about the mana. This takes 3 colored mana that is not blue, and that's really gonna put a tax on your mana base, even though you don't have to play cards like Mystic Sanctuary, even though you probably should. But you can drop Reliquary Tower since you're trying to discard the cards instead of keeping them in your hand. So you get a little bit of help there, but still having to have like 3 black or 3 green really kind of puts a hamper on the mana base.
Yeah, worth noting, like, the first one that comes down isn't just going to be one worm. If you don't have a Reliquary Tower out, you're going to be discarding a shitload of lands, which is going to make the first Worm Harvest huge.
That's true.
Yeah. So that there are some pros to this deck, but I think it's definitely the weakest variant, given that it's so fragile to graveyard hate.
That's true. I still love this card, and if I was going to build this in paper, Worm Harvest is the card I would reach for, just because I have a lot of fond memories of it, and I just love the card. But yeah, it does have some issues there. There are 2 more decks I want to talk about in the classic designation. They're not really token decks like we've been talking about, but they're kind of old school. These were the other ways you could break Treasure Hunt when it was first printed, but are a lot worse than the zombie infestation kind, and that is Lightning Storm, the absolute classic red instant spell from Cold Snap, and Conflagrate. I think I'm saying that right. Is that how you say that? Conflagrate?
You can say it however you want.
Okay. Both of these are red spells. Lightning Storm, it works a lot like Awaken the Erstwhile. It costs 3 mana. It's a damage spell that you target your opponent, and then each of you can discard lane cards to make the damage, make it deal more damage. It's like +3 for every lane card that you discard to this. And normally you're going to have way more lands in hand than your opponent when you cast this, but it'll just be doing like a set amount of damage to them. And Conflagrate is it's basically a It's like a fireball with flashback that you can cast from your graveyard. So if you were playing a deck like this, you would have to play the card first, and then you would have to flashback it and discard the cards. You could use both of these cards if you really wanted to, but both of these are very bad. But I wanted to make sure everyone knew that these cards are possible to play in paper if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think they're definitely like I think this is probably a reach compared to the other ones. Lightning Storm has seen some modern success given like its role in the Ad Nauseam deck as a win condition, and Conflagrate as well in Dredge. I do think your best bet is probably still going to be Zombie Infestation, but these are certainly available to you if you choose to play this deck in paper. And there are fringe cases where they'll be better.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. These are available, and that's the only judgment I'll put on them. Are you ready to move on to our next category?
Yeah.
Okay, so these... yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so next is the new Treasure Hunt decks, which ask you to play Treasure Hunt until there's not any cards in your deck, and then resolve one spell. Something that sometimes happens in games of Magic. Do you want to introduce us to the first one?
Yes, absolutely. So these are ones that were pretty much the win conditions for these decks were printed very recently. The other ones that we talked about are very old school. People who have heard of Treasure Hunt know about them. These are basically the new breed of Treasure Hunt cards, and all of these are going to really be... You're going to see these in Arena because they're all post Arena cards that have been added to Magic. And the first one we're going to talk about is what I think is probably this is the one you're most likely to see if you're playing on Arena and you run into a Treasure Hunt deck. This is definitely, I think, the most popular at this time. And this is using the card Thasso's Oracle. We've talked about Thasso's Oracle before, right?
Yes, we have. We had a whole episode where we talked about it a lot. Definitely some controversies around this card and its combo with a certain other card in Pioneer. It was actually one of our first episodes. It wasn't our first hate comment, so is it even real? But it was definitely the subject of much debate between the two of us. So when Thasso's Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is your devotion to blue. Put up to one of them on top of your library and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If X is greater than or equal to the number of cards in your library, you win the game.
Oh man, winning the game. That's a pretty spicy line of text there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you empty your deck, you play Thasso's Oracle, you win. That's the idea. So how does this deck actually win with Treasure Hunt? I was a little confused about when I first heard that Thasso's Oracle was a way to win with this deck. And it turns out that it leans heavily on Mystic Sanctuary. Another reason why this is very much a new type of Treasure Hunt deck. It plays a lot like the others. You mulligan until you get a Treasure Hunt. You have to empty your deck, which doesn't happen when you initially hit that Thasso's Oracle. So the idea is that you Treasure Hunt until you hit the Thasso's Oracle. You use Mystic Sanctuary to put Treasure Hunt back on top of your deck, and then you cast a full 4 Treasure Hunts. Or is it 5? It might be 5. To completely empty your deck, and then as soon as you do, you play Thasso's Oracle. And you do get a little bit of extra utility here in your lands. As you can see with the deck list that I have up on the screen right now, you can play a couple of Watery Graves, and you can play Memorial to Folly, which is a land that will actually help you get your creature win condition back, in addition to your Mystic Sanctuaries. So it's a little more resilient in that way. And Thasso's Oracle also costs 2, so it kind of works really well. You play Mystic Sanctuary, you get that last Treasure Hunt on top of your deck, and then when you draw that Treasure Hunt, you can most likely play the Treasure Hunt and the Oracle on the same turn. So the clock is a little shorter in that regard, which is definitely a pro of the deck.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely like one of the stronger versions. There's no way to get back the Thasso's Oracle if you only play one copy, and it can be killed in response to its trigger going on the stack, which makes it very fragile, because then you don't win, right? Unless you have... if you have literally 0 cards in your deck, no, your devotion has to be greater than or equal to. Yeah, so if you have 0 cards in your deck, you do still win. That's my bad. I was wrong about that. But it can be countered, and if it's countered or somehow the enters the battlefield trigger is countered, then you do lose the game.
Yeah. You get cards like Memorial to Folly, which is a tap to black land, pay 3 black, tap sacrifice, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You could play something like that if you want to, but most likely if your opponent is countering or doing something to your Thassa's Oracle to where you have to use Memorial to Folly, you're most likely losing. But you're right. That is a consideration you have to keep in mind. Some other pros of this deck, it is monocolor. This particular list splashes black. You technically don't have to, but you don't get those weird awkward mana situations like you would with like a Worm Harvest or Awaken Erstwhile. So there's that. You can drop Reliquary Tower since you need to discard the lands instead of keeping them in your hand. So that kind of takes a little burden off your mana base as well.
Right.
Yeah, so there's all of that, but the deck does have cons. You have to cycle through your whole deck, and that does add a little bit of time to your clock, even though Thassa's Oracle is cheap. So I would say this falls squarely within turn 5 as a clock. And you don't get any of that extra play because you're not affecting the board at all. You can't make tokens to block. You can't do anything about what your opponent's doing. You can only worry about milling yourself with Treasure Hunt and then playing Oracle. And then the last thing I would say, it's a clicking deck. You draw all these cards and then you have to discard all those cards. And then some of your lands you probably want to keep in your hand, like Mystic Sanctuary. Man, it is annoying to have to go through and click all of those lands you want to discard. So if that doesn't sound like something you ever want to do, you might want to stay away from this type of deck.
Yeah, I would agree. It's it can be a little bit frustrating for players who aren't into this kind of cheese.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's the Thasso Oracle deck, or Thasso's Oracle for those of you that are looking at the slideshow, for reasons we won't get into right now. But Thasso, there's that. And there's also Jace, and this is the War Jace, Jace Wielder of Mysteries. It's
one you can play in Brawl or Oathbreaker.
That's true. You can do that. Yeah. Actually, this with Treasure Hunt as a signature spell and Oathbreaker and then Deck of All Lands, would you get like beaten after the game afterwards, like with fists?
Maybe, I don't know. I think there's a lot of Oathbreaker decks. Like that's an easily broken format, so there's a lot of more broken. There's a lot more broken things you can do in that format than that. But yeah, I think that would definitely piss off a table of casual people, which, as we know, is what multiplayer formats are for.
For sure. Well, that is still a turn 5 clock, so you could probably get hated out before you do that anyway, or right. At least have your one Treasure Hunt countered. But anyway, so this is this is War Jace, 4 mana. I'm not going to read all of this. Basically, it has a static ability. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead, and then it has a +1 that lets you draw a card. There is a deck list on the screen. I kind of feel very strongly that this is just a worse version of Thassa's Oracle, since it kind of is doing the exact same thing. You could technically play Jace if you really wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would probably just always play the Thassa's Oracle. But War Jace is here if you rather play the poster boy of Magic.
Yeah. I think the draw of the Jace deck is that you can play it in Oathbreaker or Brawl, but it's definitely not as good as just the Thassa's Oracle deck.
Sure. I will say one thing about this deck is that because there's nothing you can do with black mana and it is so monocolor, you still get to play the Mystic Sanctuaries, but you have a little bit more room to play utility lands if you would like. So that's things like Blast Zone, Emergent Zone. I know a lot of people like to jam creature lands into these type of decks, which we'll talk about a bit later. But you have a little bit more room to do that kind of thing with Jace, so you can keep that in mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, all right. Are you ready to flex on the pores?
Sure.
Okay. So one awesome thing about all these decks is that they're pretty cheap. Like some of these use like 1 rare or no rares, and it's mostly just lands. But what if you want to spend a lot on lands? You just want a lot of expensive lands in your Treasure Hunt gimmick deck. Well, I think Zenith excuse me, I think Zenith Flare is going to be the deck for you. This is a uncommon from Ikoria, and a lot of people remember Ikoria as the cycling set that gave us that super low to the ground cycling deck that people would play on ladder and arena. This is kind of one of those cards. It is a Boros instant, 2 generic and then 1 red, 1 white. Zenith Flare deals X damage to any target. You gain X life, where X is the number of cards with a cycling ability in your graveyard. I think we can all see where this is going, and you can take a look at the list that's on screen now. Basically, almost all of your lands are now going to be cycling lands.
Yeah, I like this. I think it's funny. I think it's also funny to spend 8 rare wild cards on triomes.
Right.
And like, oh my god, the Almond Cat ones are in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I gotta be honest, I play a lot of Arena. I play a lot of Historic. I have not opened or crafted any of the Amonkhet cycling cards, because this is really the only deck where I would ever play them, and I'm not going to spend my wild cards on that. But yeah, so this is the bling version of the treasure hunt decks. You don't play all cycling lands. You actually play the Mystic Sanctuaries, but you also play a couple of shock lands, as you can see on the list that's on the screen. And just, I want to give credit to Jim Davis. This is one of his lists that I took off of YouTube, but I think it very clearly illustrates the deck. You play a couple of Hollowed Fountains and Steam Vents, so you can actually play Zenith Flare on turn 4. Not all of your lands are coming into play tapped, but most of them are, so you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think this is more cheese. I mean, this video is about cheesy decks mostly, or this podcast is about cheesy decks mostly, but I think this is one of the cheesier ones, and it's also going to take the longest to get going of all the decks. I don't know how I feel about this one. The Wincon being able to be used as a removal in a pinch is nice. Your Mystic Sanctuaries are going to be easy to get off, because all of the cycling lands, except for the monocolored ones, do have that subtype. So that does make it easier to bring back the Zenith Flare once you've used it.
Yeah,
I guess this deck has the most reach. Huh?
Well, I was saying that's pretty big, that your Mystic Sanctuaries are not actually hurt that much with your cycling lands.
Yeah, if I have to say something nice about this deck, it would be that it has the reach.
Yeah,
the other decks don't.
I love this deck. I actually think this is one of the more powerful versions. I played this. This is the version of the deck that I had the most success with on Historic Ladder as I was playing these decks on Arena. I actually really like this version. And I will say that this deck feels the most like you're actually playing a real game of Magic. This one has the most like real decision making that you have to make during the game, because you have the ability to cycle lands. You have to think about which lands you discard and which ones you keep. This really feels the most like playing Magic out of all of them. So I think that's a con. Like, if you're someone who's looking at these decks and thinking, oh, I don't know, it's a little on rails, it's not really playing Magic, this is the version I would tell them to try. As you mentioned, the Wincon can be used as spot removal, which is, not terrible, because you have the Mystic Sanctuaries to rebuy it if you need to. If you can cast Zenith Flare and it doesn't kill them the first time, you can Mystic Sanctuary again to kind of hit them twice, and hopefully that'll do enough instead of having to one-shot them with lands in your graveyard. That's something to keep in mind too. And this is the only deck out of all of them that gets to play a companion. Not that you would ever really play the companion, but it is there and it looks cool.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's nice to be able to add the companion. I think you could technically put the Otter as your companion in like half of these decks, right? Oh no, there's four treasure hunt. Never mind. Yeah. Oh, you could put Luris as your companion in the zombie infestation one.
Yeah, I guess you could.
And Awaken the Erstwhile. Yeah, there's no reason not to, in fact. It would let you bring back your zombie infestation.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting way of looking at it. All the deck lists that I've looked at for all of this, none of them had the zombie infestation version with a companion. But yeah, you're right. I would definitely, unless there's something we're forgetting, which I don't think that there is. You're absolutely right. I
Luris should be in there.
I don't actually think you're losing any percentage points if you don't play this with the companion, because like if you're having to play the companion, you've already lost anyway. But it is there, and adds a little bit more bling to this deck. I honestly think you ought to try this. I know you don't want to spend your wild cards, but if you had the hankering to play one of these in Arena, I really think you ought to try this one out.
Yeah, I think I might.
Just to go through some cons, because there is some stuff here. One, it's expensive, because you have to have all these cycling lands. Mystic Sanctuary is a little bit more awkward. It's not bad, and you do get it, but it is awkward, and you do have to think about how you're sequencing your lands to make that work. There is no room for utility lands or creature lands. All the land choices are made for you. You don't get to do anything like that. And it is weak to graveyard. Hey, if your opponent can just like Relic of Progenitus or one of those, whatever one exists in Arena, if they can get something like that out, you're done. The deck just doesn't exist anymore. And it's another clicking deck. It's another deck where you draw the cards, and then you have to spend like a minute clicking through your hand of 30 cards to discard all of these. And I had one game where I timed out because I took too long to discard all my cards. So keep that in mind. But overall, I actually really like this version.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's a little more wild card intensive than I'd like. I'd probably just end up building the zombie infestation version, but with Luris as a companion. But this is fun to look at if for some reason you happen to already own all of the Amonkhet cycling lands.
Yeah, I'm really curious as to who has all of those just sitting in their collection, because I play a lot and I have none of them.
I drafted a lot of that set, and I only have one or two of each. I hear there's people who complete play sets of every set.
Oh yeah. There are some people who that's how they play Arena, is that they're the playing of Arena is the collecting of the cards and filling out their collections. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, there's one more category of treasure hunt decks I want to talk about, and I'm really going to need you to fill me in on these, because these are decks I have not played. But this is the real designation. These are decks that are actually good in a real format of Modern, and these mostly rely on the card Seismic Assault. Fred, do you want to tell me a little bit about these decks?
So I don't actually have lists for you, but I can tell you the list off the top of my head. It's very easy. It's 4 Seismic Assault, 4 Swans of Bernargle, 4 Treasure Hunt, and 48 lands. When I was playing it as a broke little boy, it was Pain lands and tap life lands, because you weren't doing anything on the first turn anyway. Seismic Assault, discard a land from your hand. It deals 2 damage to target creature or player. Swans of Bernargle, if a source would deal damage to Swans of Bernargle, prevent that damage. The source's controller draws cards equal to the damage prevented in this way, and it's a 4/3 for 4 with flying. So what you would do is you would Seismic Assault your own Swans, and so every land you discard would let you draw 2 cards. And you just go from there. You fill up your hand. You basically get to draw your whole deck that way, because it's 48 lands. And then you discard the lands to Seismic Assault once you have 10 of them to deal 20 damage to your opponent, or however many are necessary to kill your opponent. You can kill your opponent at 40. You just need 20 lands. And this deck was sort of the deck that I played while I was saving up for the deck I actually intended to play in Modern. I remember doing a tournament with it where I won a first game against Burn. They'd never seen the deck before. They read the cards, and then they boarded in their Destructive Revelries and beat the shit out of me the next 2 games. And you'll find that at actual tournaments, that's generally how things go when you play these decks. He also discovered that Bolt was just Ancestral Recall when his Swans of Bernargle was out. Yeah. So I did not have a good time in those games.
Yeah, that's no good. So you hit the Swans a couple of times to draw cards to get enough for you to be able to shoot your opponent with the Seismic Assault. So in doing research for this episode, I looked at some decks, and I saw that this deck occasionally pops up in Modern, in modern tournament results. So some people are bringing this deck to modern tournaments, or at least they were before. Where do you think a deck like this, the modern version, fits into the modern metagame?
I don't think it does. I think if you want to be doing shenanigans with Seismic Assault, you're just going to play a red-green deck where you get access to things like Renin 6 and Life in the Loam, and you ditch the Swans and the Treasure Hunt. This is just the cheap version. I built this for $5 when I was in high school, I think like a freshman in high school getting into Modern, and bada bing, bada boom. I got to play in a couple tournaments. I placed in a couple of them and got store credit to get together the deck that I actually wanted to play. And I think that's where this deck fits into the modern meta. It's possible that if you were seeing Seismic Assault decks put up results in Modern, it would just be like Renin 6, Life in the Loam, Birds of Paradise, Lightning Bolt, just kind of a green-red mid-range deck that relies on Seismic Assault as a late-game win condition.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad I'm doing this with you, because I would have assumed this was a real modern deck, but apparently it's not. So I'm glad I'm getting this information from you.
It is a real modern deck in that you are allowed to take it to a modern tournament and play it.
Sure.
In the same way that the Dovin Planeswalker deck from Kaladesh is a real modern deck.
Okay, fair enough. I did see some versions of this deck that did not have swans in them. It was just Treasure Hunt. Have you seen those types of lists? And do you think that those are advisable to play over playing a swans version?
No, I don't think so. Including the swans is pretty much free because you're already playing blue for Treasure Hunt. You're going to be playing a lot of blue-red dual lands, and the swans just give you the reach that you need. They just let you make sure you're going to have it, because if you just treasure hunt for all your lands, you could be hitting like a couple treasure hunts in a row. And while that's unlikely, it's definitely possible. And the swans just let you turn each of your lands into discard this, draw 2. They have bicycling, and you just get there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for the info. But yeah, if you want to go to a modern tournament and you want to play something like this version of the deck is probably the way you want to go. I can't really speak to what the mana base looks like. I'm sure it's a red-blue deck, so take that into consideration. But this is probably the most real a deck like this is going to be in a tournament setting. So I wanted to go ahead and mention that. But that is a pretty good list of all the ways that you can play Treasure Hunt in paper and in Arena. And there are a couple of just extra considerations for this deck that I kind of wanted to discuss with you, Frederick, before we get out of here.
Yeah, take it away.
And get your expert opinion on the way that people ought to be tweaking their own Treasure Hunt decks. As I mentioned, I played a lot of these decks in Arena the last couple of days, and man, I had a real bad time in the play queue. I played in the play queue and then also in the historic ladder queue. When I play in the play queue with any of these decks, I do not see real decks, at all. Apparently, how Wizards has the deck matching and just the casual play queue, it matches these decks against other gimmick decks. I only saw other Treasure Hunt decks and then mill decks. I didn't see anything else. Do you play? Yeah. Do you play it all in the play queue, or do you just keep it exactly to the to the ladder queue?
Well, see, the way I feel is I'm not going to rank in constructed anyway. I kind of care about my rank in limited, but not that much. I just care about doing my quests. I just want to grill, so I don't play in the play queue because I figure that's I'm trying to win, so that's not really for me. So even if I go into the constructed queue and I don't do well, my deck's pretty bad, I'm not I don't know. I figure it's just not for me. I think of the Arena interface I'm walking into a local game store and I can sit down with the people playing casually, or I can register for a tournament. And I'm not going to sit down with the people playing casually and try to play some jank combo deck. I have avoided the play queue for this reason for pretty much the entire time I've been playing Arena. Also, from what I understand, the Arena play queue takes into account cards in your deck and matches you based on that, I've heard. I don't know if that's just true for Brawl or if that's true for every deck. or every format, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, it's true for every format, and I think that's exactly what's going on here. The algorithm looks at your deck, sees that it's a gimmick deck, it only puts you against other gimmick decks. And that's why I want to bring this up right now. I want to let everyone, listening and watching this know, if you take one of these decks into the play queue, you are only going to see other treasure hunt decks, and then decks like milling or other kind of, I don't like to use the term meme deck, but like a gimmick deck. Please keep that in mind. And if you only want to play against real decks, you need to be in the ladder to try these decks against like actual decks that are trying to win. So just want to make sure everyone is aware of that consideration.
If you take anything away from this episode, it should be that you must play treasure hunt decks in ranked.
I do actually. I think there's value in playing in both. I actually really like the play queue for normal decks, and sometimes you do just want to kind of play these fun decks against others. There's not no value there, but just want to make sure everyone knows that that's what's going to happen if you go into that queue. I do want to talk about utility lands. I have two on here, which were the most common ones I saw on Decklist that I saw here. But excuse me. But people also really tried to fit a lot of creature lands into these decks, or dual lands that come into play tapped or something like that. You see a lot of Blast Zone, which I'm not going to read it, but it's like, you can put charge counters on it and you can sack it to like wipe things of that convert mana cost. Or Emergent
Zone. It's like Ratchet Bomb.
Yeah, like Ratchet Bomb. Or Emergent Zone, where you can pay one tap and sacrifice it to give a spell flash, which I understand why people would try to fit that into a deck like this. It makes it a little harder on your mana base, and like you definitely I really don't think you ever want lands that come into play tapped. If you're playing a deck like this, like if you build the zombie infestation with Lurrus on Arena, do you think that you would fill it out with utility lands like this, or try to fit in creature lands into that mana base?
I don't think so. I think you should pick one. If you're trying to make like a list that's sort of ready for anything, you shouldn't be playing a gimmick deck that dies to one instance of graveyard removal. And if you're wanting to play this kind of gimmick deck, you shouldn't be rationalizing putting in lands that don't really help you with your main game plan when you're just relying on your main game plan working for you to win at all. I think, Reliquary Tower needs to be in all these decks because you need no maximum hand size, or it greatly benefits you. But stuff like Blast Zone and Emergent Zone, like maybe you can fit it in the ones that are less color intensive, like the Zombie Infestation deck. But if you're playing something like Seismic Swans in Modern, you cannot be playing lands that just have for colorless. That's not an option when you have triple red.
I agree. I see people try to fit these cards in like all the time. I'm not going to say it's 100% wrong, but I really, one, you shouldn't be putting any lands that come into play tapped unless you have to, like it's the Zenith Flare deck, because it will bite you in the butt. And yeah, if you're having to blast zone, you're not going to win because you're blast zoning instead of winning. So I'm very much keep your man base as simple as possible. Use as many basics as you can. Just keep it simple. Focus on your main game plan. That's where I lean and how I build my versions of these decks. But just keep in mind that you have a little tiny bit of room for stuff like this. Like I think my list for like Thassa's Oracle and Jace had one Castle Vantress in them, because that's kind of just free. You just have the one. That's not really going to hurt you too much. But I wouldn't go any further than that. So just something to think about there. Another one, do you want to play more than one copy of your Wincon? I see a lot of these versions of deck lists that run like 2 zombie infestations. Would you run more than 1 zombie infestation?
Yeah, I mean, the only consideration is whether it's going to stop you from having enough lands in your hand to go off with it. And I think in the case of stuff like zombie infestation, running 2 is not going to lose you. It's going to win you more games than it's going to lose you if they have a counter spell for the first one but not the second one. You know what I mean? So I think in that case, absolutely, you should be running more than 1 copy of Wincon. And in like the modern like Seismic Swans list, you have to run 4 of each of your important cards.
Sure, yeah. That deck is just a bit that deck's just a little bit different than all the ones we're talking about. That I actually fall at the other end, and I think it's kind of the same. It's the same reasoning as why you don't play a lot of utility lands. You want to be all in on your Wincon. Like that is what you're doing. And a lot of these decks, especially Zombie Infestation, you do actually have to draw the lands to be able to win with your tokens. If you draw a Zombie Infestation super early with not enough lands to win and you're just top decking lands, you lose. Almost all of those decks or all those games with that deck are going to win because you have enough cards in your hand to make it a one-shot kill. And I think if you put in more than one of your win condition, you're less likely to have those games where you're able to just dump your hand and automatically win. I think that that's really critical, and playing more than one of your Wincon kind of goes in the face of that. But I am willing to listen to smart people like you who might think of it a different way. It's possible that I'm actually wrong on this, but for me, I'll probably just stick to one Wincon, and you can prove me wrong with your list.
Yeah, we'll see. I would have to play this deck in order to prove you wrong, and I'm not sure that that's something that I'm willing to do, but we'll see.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I think it's an interesting conversation. I feel pretty strongly about one side of it, but maybe I could be what's the term I'm looking for? Convinced the other way is correct. So just something to think about with these decks. I have one more question that I bet you'll have an opinion on too, but extraneous cards that are spells. So your treasure hunt will hit them, but they are not your win con. So this would be cards like you've put on here, negate and lightning bolt. A card that I've seen a lot is I don't know the name of it. It's the artifact Elixir of Immortality that lets you shuffle your graveyard into your library, and I think it draws. Does it draw you an extra card? Yeah, you don't draw a card, but you gain 5 life. I've seen people play that card too. Do you feel that people should be putting cards like negate and lightning bolt in these decks?
I think you generally can't really afford these. If you're playing best of one, you're kind of just dedicated to trying to get this to go off, and so you can't afford anything that's maybe like gumming up the works. And if you're playing best of 3, if a card is important enough, put 4 copies of it in your sideboard and board it in when it's necessary. That's kind of my stance, and that's what I did with the Seismic Swans deck when I played it in Modern. Was like it sideboarded into Countryside Crusher if that deck was better against whatever I happen to be playing against at the moment.
Sure. I'm kind of low on this. I kind of think you really shouldn't. In the sense of you should be all in on the win con. That's why you're playing this deck. Don't be doing like you said before. If you're playing, if you have to play lightning bolt to win the game, just play a lightning bolt deck. Don't try to do something gimmicky like this. So I'm very low on this. But some people are doing it, and maybe it's correct. I'm going to kind of say it's not. That's something to think about. And I think that's going to wrap up our discussion on treasure hunt decks. I think you already answered this question, but I'm just going to ask you again. Are you immediately going to run to Arena and spend all your wild cards on cycling lands and build these decks in Arena?
How did you assume that I don't already own all of the cycling lands on Arena?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had. There is very few things in Magic that feel as good as swinging with, a huge horde of zombie tokens to win the game, or hitting your opponent on the very last turn you had to be alive, hitting them with a Zenith flare and just winning the game out from under them. It's a really good feeling when these go off. It's a lot of fun to play, and I hope that we've given you the foundation to have a good time with these decks. So I think it's about time to wrap this one up. What do you say, Fred?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gutshot. You can follow me on Twitter at FredAss_B. Will is at AgroRhetoric, and you can follow the show on Twitter at GutshotPod.
That is right. This has been Gutshot, the only MTG podcast in the top 1% of Limp Bizkit listeners on Spotify. We'll see you next time.